Hello, everyone, and welcome to AWCI's webinar, Effortless Accountability, Pipe Dreams or Possibility. My name is Tao Nguyen, AWCI's Education Program Manager. Before we start, a few housekeeping items. All attendees should be on mute during today's presentation. And should you have a question at any time during the broadcast, please submit it using the question box in your GoToWebinar dashboard. We'll have a short Q&A session at the end of the presentation. At this time, I'd like to introduce Kelly Riggs. Kelly is an author, speaker, and business performance coach. He is widely recognized as a powerful speaker and performance coach in the areas of sales, management leadership, and strategic planning. Kelly is a former sales executive, a two-time National Salesperson of the Year, a serial entrepreneur, and was selected to join the Forbes Coaches Council in 2019. So welcome, Kelly.
Well, it's great to be with you guys. Thank you for joining us. Looks like we've got a pretty good audience out there joining us. And listen, first off, I want to suggest that maybe you grab something to write with or write on if you don't have that already, because I'm going to share some content with you today I think is going to be very, very valuable. This is a version of a keynote that I do quite regularly, and it's a topic that everybody is interested in. I've been now working with organizations for 18 years, and I don't think I ever walk into an organization where we don't eventually, sometimes very quickly, begin to talk about accountability and how do we get people to take ownership of their work and all those kind of things. So you may see the words effortless accountability and think, yeah, right. But I can assure you it is a possibility. Everybody wants it, but very few know how to create it effectively, because most people see accountability as an intrinsic character trait. You hire an employee, they are either accountable or they're not. And that's a bit of a mistake. In fact, it can be a very large error, because accountability is actually a process that you create. Now, it would be nice, and it happens, that we run across people who are accountable by nature. They just take it upon themselves, and most of those people are actually leaders in your organization now. But we have a whole group of employees that work for us who have amazing amounts of talents and competencies that we need to create that process of accountability. And when you do so, it works. When you do it the right way, it works every single time. Now, that's certainly not to imply that it's easy, but it is very doable when you understand how the process works, how it works, what you need to do on your end as the leader, because accountability is driven by the leader. We tend to look at it as something that employees should have or must have, but actually, if we do what we should do correctly as leaders, then certainly we're going to be successful at creating accountability. I mentioned I've been doing this for 18 years. I actually work in the areas of organizational leadership. I do a fair amount of private coaching, one-on-one coaching with CEOs and other C-suite leaders and executive leaders. Do a ton, and I do mean a ton, of sales training. And I love sales training. I've intersected with AWCI in that realm in a past association meeting. And obviously, I do a lot of strategic planning as well. I've done that with companies, private organizations, nonprofits, associations, all kinds of things. So I have a big, broad scope of things that I do, and it allows me to intersect with a lot of different people. When you talk about organizations, I've not been in an organization, not one, that doesn't have the following problems. Everyone, and I do mean everyone, says, you know, we have communication issues. Do you have communication issues in your company? Well, let's see. We've got 79 people on, less 3 of us in the presenting mode. 76 of you. I'm going to bet 76 hands went up. Communication issues are what they are. Well, what's really interesting is when you talk to people about communication issues and you ask them, when are you going to solve those issues? They look at you like you've lost your mind. Like, you don't solve communication issues, Kelly. They just are. Not true, by the way. These companies also have mediocre performers. Again, show of hands, can't see you, but you know, how many of you have people performing at less than optimum levels? Maybe many of them. Yeah, I'm betting almost all your hands went up again. Number 3, silos, a lack of collaboration, not working together, not all rowing in the same direction, extraordinarily common. And then there's very poor engagement levels. And we're going to look at some data associated with that in just a few moments. But while I see all of these things, all of these challenges consistently inside of organizations, I also see the following things as well. Very little feedback for employees, people who cannot make decisions. They are not quote unquote empowered. Boy, that's a crazy word. People hear empowered and they get nervous, like, well, we're not going to let people do what they want to do. That's not what empowerment is. But you find employees are not capable of making decisions. They can't work autonomously. In fact, most organizations, at least many organizations, want employees to come in and dock their brain over here and follow the SOPs and the procedures. And yeah, I don't want you thinking, but yet all of us live in a very complex world. In fact, in the world of the military, there's a term that's thrown around called VUCA, V-U-C-A. And they talk about that's the kind of environment that most employees, most soldiers work in. It's volatile. It's always changing. It's always different. It's complex. It's uncertain. It's ambiguous. It's VUCA. And we ask our employees to go into those situations where things are complex and ambiguous and volatile and uncertain. And we say, hey, we don't want you to think. Well, that doesn't make a whole lot of sense. We need people to be able to respond to various inputs and variables and make good decisions, but they've got to be trained to do that effectively. We see poor onboarding and a lack of effective training that leads to learning and behavior change. We see that quite often. I've not worked with, well, I can count them on one hand, the number of organizations that have robust and very comprehensive onboarding programs for employees. Now, when you hear the word onboarding, don't think HR and getting your logins for your computers and finding out where the lunch facility is and things like that. I'm talking about onboarding that leads to performance in one's job. And then finally, so many employees say, the problem is I'm not really challenged. I don't feel challenged. One of the things that we know, and I've learned explicitly in 18 years, is that A players, they want to play on A teams, and they want to play for A leaders. B leaders don't attract A players, and A players don't want to play on a team led by a substandard leader. And these things all intersect specifically in the world of accountability. Listen, this thing we call leadership, let's just call it what it is. Leadership is hard. My son and I wrote a book together called Counter Mentor Leadership, How to Unlock the Potential of the Four-Generation Workplace. And one of our chapters was originally entitled Leadership is Hard. He decided to change it because he's a millennial and, he needs additional words. He said leadership is freaking hard. So in our book, there's a chapter called Leadership is Freaking Hard. Well, it is hard. And I want to give you a sense of how difficult it is, because I know if you've been leading more than a minute, you recognize there are so many challenges and issues associated with fulfilling the role of leader. But I want to share something with you. This actually comes from a Fortune 100 company. You would recognize the name very easily if I told you who it was. And they have something up on their walls that looks like this. It says, "These are our leadership principles. We urge you to study, practice, internalize these leadership principles every day." Now, I want you to think about what that says as you look at this list. We urge you to study, practice, internalize these practices every day. Is as though you don't have much of anything else to do. Watch this list. See, we expect you to be purpose-driven and customer-obsessed, committed to long-term excellence, be a long-term thinker, have a passion for creativity and innovation, learn and grow, hire and develop the best, and by the way, we want you to think big. Do you have time to do all this every day? Well, if you do, congratulations, but I'm not done. Here's the rest of the list. We want you to just get it done, be frugal, earn trust, empower our people, be a servant leader, seek win-win solutions. Now, I'm old school. I can remember when it was win-win. I don't know when we added a third win. I don't even know what the third win is, but That's what they want you to study, practice, and internalize every day. We want you to have courage. By the way, this is actually the one that all of us as leaders feel like we're pretty good at. We're right a lot. Of course we are. We're the leader. We share fate with self-responsibility. Do not know what that means. But it's one of those things that they want you to study and practice every day, every single day. Now, here's my question. There's actually one of those on there that is important, and I'm going to suggest to you it's the only one that is important to corporate executives. It's the only thing that matters. And I always get a lot of answers, but I'll share with you what the answer is. It's just get it done. Look, you know what you get paid to do? You get paid to get things done. By the way, if you think I'm wrong, go a week or two without getting things done and then report back to me and tell me how that's going, right? It's really sounds great to have all these high-minded ideas about what leadership is and what we should be doing. And granted, there is a lot of nuance to leadership, and it is hard. It's difficult. You can see why, but in the end, it comes down to this. You've got to get things done. The question is, how? How do you get things done? It would be nice if we could hire an entire team of people who are naturally, proactively, intrinsically, intuitively accountable, except that it just doesn't work that way because there are all varieties of behavioral styles, personality styles, and there are very competent, capable people who don't demonstrate a lot of initiative. We can go down that path sometime. This is not the time for it, but there are people that need direction, need you to point them in the right way, I'm going to say it this way. I don't mean it demeaning, but they need their hands held a little bit until they get comfortable and safe, and then they're good to go. They get in their lane and they're good at it. But many times we're going to look at people and go, I can't quite understand why this individual does not appear to be accountable. And I'm going to show you a model towards the end of this that will help explain some of the issues. Here's the overarching question we want to answer. It's one of three very important organizational questions when we're trying to create a high performance team that creates radical results, disproportionate results. Very much a possibility, but it's far deeper and far more systemic than some magic dust that you learn in a webinar. But this will give you some idea of what direction we're moving. How do you create a workplace of unlimited potential? Well, there's three big levers that you have to pull here. One of those, obviously, is you need to hire unique talent. You need to hire the right talent. That's a whole nother program, a whole nother conversation. It is amazing to me how all of the problems that we face, and I mean all of the problems we face, are people problems. Think about it as leaders. Your problems are people problems. In fact, being in business would be really, really easy if it weren't for people. Employees, vendors, customers, coworkers, yikes, right? But how do you create that enthusiastic engagement? You know what the data says? According to Gallup, for the last 20 years, engagement, the number of engaged employees, has hovered at 1 in 3, somewhere between 30 and 36% since I've been doing this. It's down a little bit after COVID. It was up a little bit pre-COVID, and some of the age demographics have actually been impacted quite a bit more than others. But as an aggregate, roughly 1 in 3 employees is engaged. Now, if you've never heard that term, I suspect you have, but if you haven't, it's the level of connection that I feel with the company. It's how passionately enthusiastic I am about doing my job. It has nothing to do with competence or technical ability. It has to do with, do I believe in the company, the organization, its mission, its vision? Am I bought in? Do I come to work ready to give everything that I have to the job? Now, according to Gallup, roughly 1 in 3, 2 out of 3, not so much. In fact, roughly half of employees are what Gallup calls not engaged. This is the kind of employee that you look and you scratch your head and you go, I just can't quite figure this out. This individual's got the talent, but they just, they're the kind of people that are there in their seats at 8 a.m. in the morning, but at 5 o'clock when the bell rings, they're already in their car leaving. They're not going the extra mile. They don't seem to dig in and really go the extra amount of work that needs to be done, and you just scratch your head and go, I wonder what's going on. Well, what's going on is they've begun to disengage. And if they get far enough down that ladder, there's another subsection, about 17% of employees. And Gallup says that they're actively disengaged. Actively disengaged. You and I wouldn't use that terminology. We would use the word toxic or dysfunctional. They've got an axe to grind. They don't like working for you. When you think about the number of employees that are toxic or dysfunctional, they dramatically impact the performance of the 1 in 3 that are actually engaged. There's such a drag, a resistance to the kind of performance you're capable of that we never fully realize what we're actually capable of and what we can do. Here's another question. How can you overcome the resistance to creating exceptional results? How do you create mission focus? We know that, for example, 70% of change programs fail due to employee resistance and a lack of leadership support. Other data, there's a lot of data out there that suggests that companies just do not create exceptional results. And it's not because we don't know how. It's not because we don't have the technical competence and capability. It's not because we don't have good products and services. It's organizational. It's people. It's leadership. There's 3 big levers to pull here as well, and most people never get there. But the third question that I want to talk about is this one. How do you create effortless accountability? How can you empower people to proactively take ownership of their work? Recent data shows that 82% of managers acknowledge that they have limited or no ability to impact the accountability of employees. I want you to think about that. Now, some of you are going, well, that's crazy. It's not happening here. We give our leaders all the authority they need. Do you? Do you really? Or is your organization sort of stuck in that paradigm of we need to hire people who are accountable? And when they're not accountable, we wring our hands and we get upset and we start figuring out, is there a way to get rid of them and replace them with somebody else? The answer is no, because we're way too busy. And by the way, it's hard to find good people today. The biggest complaint that I hear overall is we just can't find people, despite the fact that, people are laying off people left and right. We still have an unemployment rate in the 3.5 range, 3.5%. It's very difficult to find people. Vast majority of organizations, read that as 95% or better, do not have robust hiring programs, a system, a methodology to consistently identify, attract, hire, retain A players. Don't have it. The biggest problem that we have organizationally, people problems, and we don't bear down on the concept of finding, attracting, onboarding, retaining high quality talent. Now, I get it. Most people are like, yeah, really? You don't understand. By the way, that's a comment I get a lot. You don't understand. But as a guy who's owned 4 companies or co-owned parts of 4 companies and been an executive, I do get it. This is the problem. Here's the problem. Because this is what we all look like in leadership. If you ever come to work on Monday morning, you've spent the weekend organizing this chaos that is your job, and you've got so many high priorities, and you've worked through them all, and you've got a to-do list that's loaded. Number 1, paramount importance. Got to get this done Monday. Then number 2, 3, and 4. I've got a half a dozen high-level priorities that must get accomplished. You come into work a little bit early, you start to work on them, and the phone rings. Or somebody walks into your office. We've got some people out today. So-and-so called in sick. We just had a vendor call. That customer delivery is not going to happen today. They're screaming at us. You know the drill. And we become firefighters. In fact, I'm going to suggest to you, you're good at it. I mean, you come in and you suit up. Get that helmet on, you get that fire hose, and you're ready to go put out some fires. And now we don't like it. We look at that to-do list over here on the corner of the desk and go, yeah, that's really what I need to be doing. But you know what? They pay me to solve problems, to make decisions, to put out fires. And I'll go to lunch and complain about it. And I'll work late and get home and tell my significant other what a difficult day it was. But I'll also pat myself on the back and go, man, today was tough. But I got some things done today. I mean, I took care of some issues, except the ones that are important. Ever been there? That list of 5 or 6 high value prioritized items in one day has already gone up to 14. And you're thinking, what am I going to do tomorrow? Because tomorrow I'm going to get to work and the phone's going to ring. Listen, this is the reality of leadership. And most people have absolutely no idea how to get off the hamster wheel. I mean, it's just never ending. Another one of the chapters in our book, we talk about the 4 most dangerous words in your vocabulary as a leader. You ready? You probably already know what they are. I don't have time. I don't have time. Look, Kelly, I get it. We're in a webinar. Okay. You're talking about leadership. I need to do some things better. I need to be a better planner. I need to be a better communicator. I need to do better with hiring people. We need some processes and things put in place to help us get better. But who has time for that? I had a CEO of a very large company tell me one time, he goes, we desperately need a strategic plan. We just don't have time. I'm like, what? Okay, well, that's a problem. And it's because we're all in firefighter mode consistently. It's a challenge. When I started doing this in 2006, I was entranced with the concept of employee engagement. I mean, I was like, okay, employee engagement is the empirical measurement of how connected employees are. Why should you care? Because employees who are engaged, according to every study that's been done, do better work. Listen, I personally don't need a study to tell me that happy employees do better work, but it turns out they do. By the data, they're safer, they're more productive, they're more profitable, they're better with customers, customer satisfaction, they have less turnover, they steal less. Yeah, I mean, they track that data. Okay, so the question is, how do you create employee engagement? So after studying this for quite a while and coming to some conclusions, I wrote a book in 2008 called One-on-One Management, What Every Great Manager Knows That You Don't. And it was oriented around this concept and got in great detail. But employee engagement is a function of leadership. Turns out Lee Branham wrote a book in 2007 as I was preparing the work that I was doing, and they did a study where they surveyed 19,500 employees, and they asked them a simple question: why did you leave the company you left? Okay, the 7 hidden reasons employees leave is the name of the book that outlined the survey results, the study results. They asked 19,500 employees, why did you leave? 70% of employees said, I left because of the boss. I left because of the person I work for. Your direct supervisor, manager, whatever you call them. The other 30%, a big chunk of that was upper management and leadership, lack of trust, lack of understanding of our direction, lack of line of sight to career progression, a lot of those kinds of things. So employee engagement is a function of leadership, and leadership is influence. It's the simplest definition of leadership there is. Stephen Covey, John Maxwell, Ken Blanchard, you read those guys, they're going to tell you, hey, look, leadership is influence. If I can influence you positively, then that culture creates a level of engagement that rises, that increases. Your passion and enthusiasm for the job increases. If that influence is not good, if it's negative, eventually you disengage, sometimes to a toxic level, that active disengagement that I described, and you leave. Turnover costs you money? Shake your heads like this. Oh yeah, it's grotesquely expensive to deal with turnover. But where does influence come from? How do I earn the ability to lead, to influence? Well, working backwards, we realize that that's a function of trust. Now, before you think, oh, we're going to get all squishy here, we're going to hold hands and sing kumbaya around the campfire. Nah, listen, it's human nature. This stuff we call soft skills is really a bad label because it makes it sound like, oh, they're soft skills. They don't really matter like those hard skills, technical capabilities. Listen, you're not going to fail as a leader because of your technical skills. 100% you're going to fail because of your quote unquote soft skills. A big part of that's what we call emotional intelligence. It's the ability to develop empathy and relationships and to have emotional regulation, the ability to create trust with employees. Trust, listen to me now, trust is the mother's milk of leadership. You don't have trust, people don't follow you. Game over. It doesn't happen. But the real question is how do you develop trust? Well, in a big, broad sense, after reading everything that we could find and looking at all the research, trust is a function of communication. Now, before you think that it's communication just what I say, well, Kelly, I'm good at that. I can tell people what to do all day long. No. Communication implies understanding. It implies dialogue. It implies input and feedback. But communication is not just what you say, it's what you don't say. Communication is what you do. It's also what you don't do. In fact, when you have underperformers on your team and you allow them to stay, that communicates pretty widely. Think about it. In fact, which communicates more effectively, what you say or what you do? You see my point? Communication's a big bucket. All communication should be intended to evoke trust with my people, because then when they trust me, I can influence them. I can create a culture of excellence, and we can drive employee engagement. And this thing starts to revolve, and it's like a flywheel. It gains momentum, and it dramatically improves performance. No, that's not hypothetical. That's what the data says. And so we start to think about communication, and we begin to understand that the single most important thing that you do as a leader is to create clarity. Yeah, clarity. You communicate effectively. And I'm going to bring this down into a realm of practical application. So don't get worried. We're not going to stay at the 30,000 foot view level. I'm going to bring it down into very specific, time-honored tactics that work that you can use today, right? But let me give you some insights. Many, many years ago, the United States Army conducted a study internally to try to figure out what the sources of failure are. I mean, what the military cares about is the failure of a soldier to perform under duress, under stress, to be able to perform effectively. And then they wanted to narrow down all the sources of failure to just one. The only acceptable failure is the soldier makes a mistake. The soldier does something wrong. But there are three other sources of failure that they identified that they said are completely under our control. Our control. The first one is there's no standard. Some of you, I'm certain, in a crowd this big of almost 80 people, some of you have probably served in the military. If you did, you know this. Military has a standard for everything. They have a standard for how you pack your locker and make your bed and wear your uniform and every other thing in the world, because it's very difficult to hold people accountable if there's no standard for that. I mean, how do you criticize someone's performance if they don't even know what they're being criticized against? Okay. Number two is, there is a standard, but they don't know what it is. There's no training to it. There's no training to it at all. And in the military, they call that a training failure, because we've got a standard for how we do it, but we ineffectively or do not train people to follow that standard. Failure number three is, there's a standard and we train them to it. But listen carefully. We don't hold people to that standard. In the military, they call that a leadership failure. Oh, yes, we have a standard and we train people to it. You don't go to the range to shoot to try to achieve your marksmanship badge that you wear on your uniform. There's a standard, and you're going to shoot that standard, or they send you back to the range. They send you back for more training. They don't go, hey, you know what? That was really close, and you tried hard. We're really proud of you. We're going to give it to you anyway. They don't do that. Turns out, very difficult to create accountability if you lower the standard, because how far will the standard come down ultimately? Clarity makes the world go round. And as a leader, when you comprehend this and begin to apply it effectively, it's going to change your world. Robert Townsend, former CEO of Avis, one of my favorite business quotes, is one of the most important tasks of a manager is to eliminate his or her employees, their excuses for failure. Read that again, because it implies something that's really important. Did you pick up on it? It implies that you can be the reason your people fail. Yes. And it's this great excuse that it's not my fault, it's your fault. Well, I'm sure some of you have had people say that to you. In some cases, it's not justified, but in some cases, it is. Let me give you two of the most common excuses for failure. The single most common excuse for failure, I didn't know. I didn't know. Now, if they don't know, whose fault is that? That's a communication problem, right? Now, the other side of that coin is you told them once and they come back and said, I didn't know that. And you go, don't you remember, three Wednesdays ago, 4:00 in the afternoon, I was passing you in the hallway as you were coming out of the break room, and I told you exactly what I wanted. I'm old enough to remember that when my dad said, I'm going to tell you once, and I'm not going to tell you again. Well, that sounds lovely, but it's really bad human psychology because people don't learn or change behavior based on being told something once. But the reality is many times people just don't know because they weren't told. For example, you tell me, hey, I need that budget report. I got a finance meeting this Friday. I need it for that finance meeting. So I bring you a full color, spiral bound, 8.5 by 11 notebook of the report that you want. And you look at me and go, what is that? I go, that's the report you asked for. What is wrong with you? I don't need a binder. I need a PowerPoint presentation. Oh, I didn't know that. Whose fault? And it's really interesting what typically accompanies that from the leader standpoint. How do they not know that? I've heard this from owners and executives for years. How does somebody not know that? I knew it. Well, turns out if it's important enough for them to know, we probably ought to teach them and train them and tell them so that they do know. Excuse number two, very common. I didn't know how. I'm going to show you this in just a moment, but it's amazing how many times we're expecting people to do things that they're just not capable of doing. Oh, they may even act like they're capable. We certainly assume they're capable, but they're not. By the way, the third reason on this list, the top three in a landslide, the third one is I didn't have time. Now, I have had this conversation many, many times with executives, and they'll say, I just hate those excuses. I didn't have time. Here's my great coaching to that employee. You need to learn to work smarter, not harder. Oh, well, thank you for that. That's very helpful. Could you show me how to work smarter? I mean, it sounds good in a notebook, but how about we really apply it? Here's the reality. Sometimes your people, they're telling you the truth. They don't have time. You know how I know? Because I've had this conversation literally in 18 years, hundreds of times. Employees who are fully capable. I want you to think about somebody on your team. They're amazing. They're great at what they do. You love having them on your team because you can give them something and it's done. They're the prototype A player, and you've got one, maybe more than one. But every time something difficult or important or unique comes up, who do you give it to? Well, of course, the person that I can trust, the person who is going to do the job. They're absolutely accountable, right? Come to find out, I have discussions with those people, and they're wondering if there's anybody else on the team that actually does any work. Because every time there's some project, it gets given to me. We think that we're giving them a backhanded compliment, like, you're so important, I'm going to give you the hard stuff. I'm going to give you and I keep piling it on. And they come back and go, look, you don't understand. I don't have time. You've got 3 other project priorities that have to be on your desk in the next 2 weeks. When am I going to do that? Listen, you'll figure it out, right? Yeah, good luck. You've just contributed greatly to their disengagement. Yeah, clarity, ensuring that people know exactly what it is that they need to be doing. They know how, they understand the parameters, critically important. And it's really important when you talk about creating accountability. Yeah, I use a fire truck on this slide because it's amazing how certain organizations absolutely tend to be accountable. In fact, it's really not a choice, is it? So we think, well, the reason a fire department is accountable is because of their mission. A Navy SEAL team, an emergency medical room team, oh, they have to be accountable. Well, it turns out that's not true, because it turns out that there are some who are not very good. And I know that intimately about fire departments because I have a son who's a firefighter, first responder, paramedic. And turns out not everybody is absolutely built on the same platform as everybody else when it comes to fire departments. We would think, oh, everybody's accountable. Nope, not so much. What they do is they impose a process of accountability. And the people who can't work at that standard don't get to stay very long. All right? It is a process. And no shock, the first step in that process is really important. You have to create crystal clear expectations. Now, I'm going to talk a little bit about that in a moment and show you how to do that. Because the real problem for most leaders is they think they're creating clear expectations, but they're not. I'll give you an example. You're talking with an employee and they don't appear to have their eye on the ball. They're not zoned in. They're not meeting some deadlines and that kind of thing. And you look at them very seriously with your best leadership scowl face, where you're really serious. You say, listen, you need to get focused. Yes, sir. I'm on it. I'm focused. Clear expectation. I mean, I gave him the full package. What does that even mean, to get focused? Right? You think that's coaching? You think that's clear expectations? I beg to differ. And I'm going to show you why. Number 2 in the process is you have to review those expectations consistently. Now, we're not going to talk about it today, certainly don't have time, but as a part of our leadership development work, consulting work that I do, we teach a very specific methodology for review. And it is a game changer. Not because I say so, but because I've had hundreds of executives and managers tell me over the years, buddy, this changed the game for us completely. I had no idea. You set those clear expectations, you review them consistently. And then number 3, you've got to make sure that you address performance issues. And when I say address performance issues, that issue could be they did a great freaking job. They blew it away. They knocked it out of the park, your metaphor, whatever, okay? Recognition, encouragement, reward, those things are critically important to human nature. Yeah, but the side that we tend to look at that really need addressing is lack of performance, behavioral challenges, attitude problems, whatever it is. If you're not addressing them now in real time, you are allowing, yes, you, leader, are allowing mediocrity to seep into your team. That's not because I say so, because it's reality. I mean, let me say something that's going to sound harsh. Many of you may initially react adversely to this. But if you have an underperforming team, it's not your team's fault. It's your fault. You're the leader. People go, come on, that's just dumb. Really? Who hires your people? Who trains your people? Who's responsible to lead them? You hire them, you train them, you're their leader, and when they don't do well, it's their fault. It's you go, well, hang on a second. I've got some people working for me. I mean, they can barely walk and chew gum at the same time. Mm-hmm. And whose fault is that? You see, we're not replacing mediocre people. We're not. And listen, again, a lot of people go, well, the answer to you for everything is just fire people. No, it's not. No, the answer for me for everything is to coach and develop. But if they simply cannot rise to the minimum standard of performance required by the role, then yes, I can't use them. I mean, apologetically, listen, I'm so sorry, but I just can't use you because I'm not going to do the work for you. If you take this approach, if you set crystal clear expectations, and we'll look at that, if you review them consistently and you address performance issues, accountability will become a part of your culture automatically. Take a little while, not long, but it'll take some time, and then you'll turn the corner. I've got a company I'm working with here locally. Originally got contacted. Look, we've got the most drama-filled, dysfunctional culture you can imagine. I can't do it anymore. It's driving me crazy. It's got to go away. Okay. So engaged, and we went in, had initial conversations. I said, give me about 60 to 90 days. I'm going to say closer to 60. We're going to clean out the toxic employees, and then we'll begin to rebuild your culture, and we'll create something that'll really work. At just over 60 days, we had eliminated the people that were a problem. Didn't even fire them. No, they self-selected out. It's amazing what happens when you begin to shine the light of performance expectations on people. They start to get really nervous. And if you do it the right way that we coach you to do, they eventually almost always leave on their own. But let's talk about setting clear expectations. Standard expectations sound like this. Hey, you really need to bear down on this project. Hey, we need you to get out there and make more customer calls. You're going to have to do something with your attitude. We need that attitude to improve, right? Those sound like pretty clear expectations, don't they? Except no, they're not. We need you to make more sales calls. Well, Kelly, isn't that clear? Oh, sure. So one more than what I'm doing now, and I'm good, right? And you're going to go, well, no, that's stupid. Well, you weren't specific. In fact, the first step in setting clear expectations is the final results got to be crystal clear. I mean, crystal clear. We tell the story in the book that I wrote with my son, Counter Mentor Leadership. We tell the story of my son, the firefighter, the first responder paramedic, and how he went into the firehouse. The captain made it crystal clear what their expectations are. And I mean, it's a case study for how you do it with the simplest of illustrations, just crystal clear expectations. That desired outcome has got to be crystal clear. More calls? How many? To what end? To what kinds of customers? What are you asking them to do specifically? When you say you want them to focus, that's not a clear expectation. Focus on what? How much? To do what? To accomplish what? You've got to get it in your mind. And here's the illustration that I always use. Very simple. I won't go into detail, but many of you, maybe all of you, have kids. You ever ask your kids to clean their room? Yeah, some of you, that's an adventure. You're like, yikes, that doesn't happen. Why not? After all, you're the parent. You're the leader. Parent's just a fancy word for leader, developing children to become adults, influencing their behavior so that they can adult effectively. All right. You ask them to clean their room. They don't clean their room. They say, hey, I cleaned my room. And you go up and look, and you look around and you're like, what did you do? Well, I did a couple of things. I fulfilled my definition of clean. Listen, if they don't know what a clean room looks like, and if they don't know exactly how to get it to that state, then your expectations are not clear. Number two, you've got to agree upon a time frame, right? I need you to make 12 more calls monthly, every month, and we'll review it every month. I need you to, do X by X date. We need to agree on the time frame. When is that project due? When can you have this done? January? No, no, that's not going to work at all. So we can settle on a date. By the way, here's a pro tip. Don't set the time frame for them. New project, new responsibility, something you want them to accomplish, or something they need to do on a consistent, repetitive basis. You set the time frame in place. By close of business every Friday, or every Monday morning when you come to work, or we need this done by April 15, close of business, whatever it is. Here's the pro tip, though. Let them set it. When do you think you could have this done each week or this time or whatever? And if they give you a number that's out of bounds, then your answer is like, oh, been doing this a long time. You know what the standard response is? Will that not work? No, actually it won't. We need to try to move that up to this date. Yeah, now I'm setting the time. I get it. But then my immediate question is, what would we have to change to allow you to have it done by that time? You see, my general philosophy of leadership, hire adults. Treat them like adults, not children. And if they can't act like adults, can't use them. It's a pretty easy standard. Hire adults. Set the expectation. We hire adults. We're going to ask you to act like adults, right? To do what adults do in a good case scenario. So if they commit to something, then my expectation is, listen, I want to be clear. If you're telling me you can have it done by 15 April, close of business, that's when we need it. That's what I'm planning on. That's what I'm counting on. Is that fair? Yes. Okay. Now, does stuff happen? Some of you are going, well, that sounds great in theory, Kelly, but stuff happens. I get that. You know what my other expectation of them is? Listen, at any point you feel like you're going to fall behind or you're not going to hit it, my very firm expectation is you're going to let me know about that immediately so that I can bring new resources to bear, so that we can make sure that we hit our deadline. We're in the customer-facing business. We have to impact customers positively. Customer experience is everything. We don't have the luxury of not fulfilling the roles that we play with our customers. So if you're not going to make it, I expect to know. And while I fully expect that we're going to make mistakes, I fully expect that there are going to be problems along the way. If you fail to give me heads up notice, that one you might not recover from. That one's critical. And people go, I'm in, I get it. You know, A players, they're 100% on board. You know who doesn't like this? C players, B minus players, because you're drawing a very firm set of boundaries for people, and they work in the shadows. You know what I'm talking about? They're just trying not to be noticed, not to be seen, just to get by. This kind of thing brings all that to the light of day. Number 3, really critically important, is something that my parents never did because they were taught not to. Yeah, they were taught not to. You see, explaining the why is critically important. Why am I asking you to do this? Why is this deadline important? Why is this project meaningful? Why is what we're asking you to do matter? You know, my parents, I'd say why, they'd say what? Yes, because I said so. Well, that's adorable. Except that psychologically speaking, it's a train wreck, because when you say something like that to people, look, just do your job. You don't need to know why. Or, hey, I don't have time for that. Or just because I said so, psychologically speaking, it creates enormous amount of resistance. I mean, people are resentful of that nonsense. You know why? Because you're not treating them like an adult. Adults don't do that. It's what you do with your kids, right? Okay, you cannot go out tonight. Why? Well, because that's the rule we've laid down, 10 o'clock or 9 o'clock, whatever, that's the limit. But I can still explain the why. If you don't explain the why to kids, that's where a lot of their resentment builds up. They don't have to agree with it, but if they understand the why, they can cope with it. And that's why it's critically important. Here's the thing. Conflict is nothing more than frustrated expectations. Yeah, you expected one thing, you got another. It begins to create conflict because we react in a way that begins to make people feel defensive. In fact, I'll go so far as this. When you talk about accountability, it's not what you preach, it's what you tolerate. Extreme Ownership, written by Jocko Willink and Leif Babin. Great book. It's all about the concept of taking ownership of people's work so that you create a process of accountability. It is not what you preach. You can pound your fist on the table and say, starting today, we're all going to be accountable. Not going to matter one whit. It's what you tolerate. And if you tolerate mediocrity, that's what you get, is mediocrity at some level. This is a model that I use when we work with leadership teams. I'll show you the outline of it. But when it comes to accountability, there are a lot of people that appear not to be accountable. And there's not just one big broad bucket that says, oh, they're not accountable, so I know why. No, you really don't until you analyze it, because it can be one of 3 things. It can be clarity, which we've been talking about. It can be capability. Can they actually do the job? And if everything's crystal clear, they know exactly what to do and why, and they know how to do it, but they still appear to be disengaged or lack accountability, it's a motivation issue, guaranteed. And motivation has a component for them as an employee, and there's a component for me as the leader, and we go into great detail. But clarity creates focus. What I do, I have very clear objectives and expectations. Success in that role or in that project is defined. Very important that we get into in great detail. Capability gives me confidence. I've seen a lot of employees, even managers, who appear to be unaccountable, who lack accountability. It's because they lack confidence to do what you're asking them to do and to do it effectively. This is the skills and the processes they use. Do I provide coaching and resources and adequate time in many cases? Motivation is about effort and intensity. And do I feel challenged? Do I have autonomy? Am I rewarded? Am I encouraged? It's a powerful, powerful model that enables me to look at every individual employee, figure out what the problem is. If there's a lack of accountability, I can figure it out. Indeed. Well, we hit the number right on the head. Left 10 minutes for Q&A at the end. So we'll either use a part or all of the next 10 minutes for questions. And I'm going to throw it back over to Tao and see if we've got any questions. By the way, if you've been rapidly paying attention. That's my hope. And you haven't had time to write any questions in the box, please look at your GoToWebinar control panel and find the question tab and get your questions in there. And I'm happy to answer anything that you might have had along the way. And while you're doing that, just to recap, you can connect with me on LinkedIn using that QR code that you see on the screen. Love to connect with you. Having spoken at an AWCI conference a few years ago, I did connect with several of you. Looks like we've still got around 80 people, so that's encouraging. But I'd love to connect with you. You're always welcome to have a conversation with me. And my email, by the way, is Kelly, Kelly, at bizlockerroom.com, the website that you see there. So, Tal, I don't know if you have any questions that you've accumulated. I don't see any on the screen.
Yeah, there's a couple here. One says, how do you balance holding individuals accountable while also fostering a supportive and collaborative work environment?
Well, listen, this is a great question. It's the meat of the matter, actually, because so many people perceive accountability as some kind of blame, that we're going to put people under pressure and all that. Accountability is just the process of saying, hey, here's what we agreed to, right? These were the expectations that were set up here. And this is what I'm observing by way of performance. So you tell me what's going on, what's creating the gap. The big difference when we teach, we call this a part of the coaching conversation. This is where we actually coach and address very specific things, Tal. What we're trying to do is take it away from personality conflicts. And the way most managers will approach it is they'll go in and start telling people what they're doing wrong and what they got to fix. That's not what we teach. We teach that we've set clear expectations and we're not performing to that level. So help me understand what's going on in your world and let's see if we can find an answer. Doing that lowers the level of defensiveness dramatically. And again, it's like treating someone like an adult. We have a conversation about it.
Thanks, Kelly. The next one is, can you say a little bit more about reviewing consistently?
Yes. Consistent review it kind of harkens back to, I think it was President Reagan that said, trust but verify. A lot of people think that, if you trust people, you don't check on them. Not true. But the other side of that coin is if you're consistently checking on your people to see if they're doing their job, it's because you don't trust them, right? So there's a balance here of how do I follow up and check on things without creating the sense that I'm micromanaging every movement that you have. We create a weekly one-on-one meeting with your direct reports. Now, immediately there are a bunch of people, Tal, that go, I have 22 direct reports. I'm not meeting with each one of those weekly. Let me tell you what the problem is. Number one, you have way too many direct reports. Okay, that's not an opinion. That's been validated in psychological and organizational behavior 100 times. By the way, the U.S. military knows this better than anybody. The perfect fire team is 4 people. They say the scope of responsibility should be around 6, maybe as many as 8. 8's pushing it. So that weekly meeting with 6 direct reports brings you completely up to speed, helps you review what's going on in their world. And it's not a status update. It's actually just a dialogue, a conversation. And we teach managers how to do that, how to do it effectively. And they routinely come back and go, that's the most important skill that I've learned. That and setting these expectations very clearly.
In an industry that is difficult keeping enough workers to perform the work we've contracted to perform, how do we hold workers accountable without them leaving for other companies that won't hold them accountable?
Wow, heavy question, very loaded, very common. What it tells me is that you're being held hostage by employees. Oh, I can't possibly hold them accountable because if, and again, it's this notion of accountability is this thumbs down, oppressive kind of approach. It's nothing of the sort. Understand this, A players love to play on great teams. They want to be accountable. They want to know where the boundaries are. They want to rise to meet a standard. When leaders create the right culture, and this is one of the big levers that we pull in our training, is teaching leaders how to be effective in one-on-one scenarios and how to create that culture that people want to be a part of, then you'll never have a problem keeping people. Engagement is that measurement of how much people want to work for you. Well, how you operate as a leader and the culture you create for your team determines whether or not people are engaged. When they're engaged, listen, I'll give you some crazy data. According to Gallup's data, and this was originally done again going back to the 7 habits or the 7 hidden reasons employees leave, they asked those 19,500 employees, why did you leave? They didn't do it in HR. They did an outside firm to come in and say, hey, on the down low, why did you leave? They asked managers why their employees left. Their answers were so different. It's amazing. Almost 9 out of 10 employees said they left because of their immediate manager or supervisor, not because they were holding us accountable. It was because I don't like working for this individual. But when they asked the managers, why did they leave? You know what the managers thought? Almost 9 out of 10, almost an exact answer on the other side of the coin, because of pay and benefits. Listen, when employees go through that exit process, they go to HR and say, hey, we hate to lose you. Why are you leaving? Oh, I got a better opportunity. I'm going to make more money. In fact, in today's economy, employees actually do know they can go down the street and get a 15 or 20% raise pretty easy. You know why? Because they're having trouble finding employees too. The question is, how do we create an environment where people don't want to leave? Because that same research from Gallup says that if people are engaged, they won't leave for even 20 or 25%. But if they're not engaged, they'll leave for about anything close, because of the person they work for. It's a process. I mean, there's no magic bullets here, but there is a methodology for training up your leaders to create engaging environments.
Okay, and last question, what support or resources are available to help employees meet their accountability goals?
What resources are available? Well, a bunch. You can read a couple of really good books. And I would suggest one, shockingly, Counter Mentor Leadership, How to Unlock the Potential of the 4th-Generation Workplace. We talk about it at length. You can get that on Amazon, audiobook, Kindle. You can get it all kinds of places. You can engage with somebody like me. It doesn't have to be me, but you can engage with somebody. Bringing someone in from the outside always seems like an expense. Tao, it's not an expense. It's an investment. You're going to get that money back in multiples if you get the right person, and they can help you become a more effective leader and create that culture of effortless accountability.
Well, thank you so much, Kelly, for this informative presentation. Thank you, attendees, for joining us today. We hope to see everyone at Build 24 AWCS Convention and Expo, March 24th to 27th in Orlando, Florida. And our next webinar is Succession Planning Without Regret. ESOPs versus other forms of sales will be on April 10th at 2. So more information can be found on our website, awci.org. Again, thank you, Kelly. Thank you, everyone. Have a good day.